Welcome to the Bald Ambition Podcast. I'm your bald host, Mookie Spitz. And today, my ambition will be to discuss politics within the framework of branding, consultative selling. Now, allow me to quickly begin with a disclaimer. I am not advocating one political position over another. What I'm trying to do with this particular exercise is to illustrate the power of a brand identity and the effectiveness of good messaging. Conversely, I want to reveal the impact of bad messaging on the brand identity of an opposing product, service, or in this case, political party. Now, on prior episodes, I have brought on guests where we looked at branding, brand identity, consultative selling through the lens of politics. Politics is dependent on perception versus reality, as we've discovered more and more year after year. We live in an attention economy. Those politicians, analogously to those products and services of the past, who have been able to garner maximum mind share of consumers, in this case, voters, win elections. Donald Trump, love him, hate him, has been a maestro of maximizing attention. He has captured attention. He has managed, and once again, I am not partisan in this. These are simply facts. He has managed since 2015 to captivate the attention not only of the country, but of the world. And he has done so through his intuitive understanding of his audience, of his consumers. So a study in how Donald Trump uses brand identity and messaging is a worthy exercise for anyone specializing in branding, marketing, public relations. Now, today I'd like to cite a particular experience that I have had on social media and relate that to this topic at hand. Here's what happened. I was on TikTok and I do first-person point of views. I literally hold my smartphone, stand in the kitchen of my apartment, and express opinions. I've been doing this since about December, the end of last year. And on TikTok, from scratch, I've acquired about 15,500 followers and accrued about 250,000 likes on my videos, inclusive of, tens of thousands of comments and favorites and reshares. Now, in the social media influencer ecosystem, I would be considered a micro influencer. You've got other folks accruing exponentially larger engagement statistics. Folks have millions of followers, tens of millions of likes. So I am junior league. But I'm not doing too badly for, once again, a bald guy in his kitchen holding up his phone expressing his opinions. Now, I've covered lots of ground, everything from art to science to culture to relationships. Often, whatever's on my mind in the moment, I'll grab my phone and I'll make sure I'm in a different colored polo shirt from my last rant, just to give the page a little bit of a variety. And then anywhere from about 50 seconds to 5 minutes, I'll express myself. TikTok, more so than Instagram, arguably more so than Google, YouTube, does an exquisite job of identifying the content that I'm releasing to the world and aligning it with the expectations of users. So over the course of time, as I've described, I've accrued some followers. I've gotten decent engagement. And as a kind of A/B test, I've posted the exact same videos with the same setup, the same descriptions, the same hashtags on Instagram, and I've accrued no new followers. I'm not kidding. I've actually lost a few with hardly any engagement whatsoever. It's a ghost town for me. Now, I'm a marketer. I know PR. I know digital. And I could do conceivably paid ads on Instagram. I could jockey the algorithm. I could, God forbid, cater my content for particular expectations. But to me, that's defeating the purpose of earned media. And frankly, I've been conducting this experiment to see how well the various channels do in terms of purely earned engagement. I haven't spent a penny on advertising. It shows on Instagram, and maybe it's a commentary on the content itself. But as I'm saying, on TikTok, I've had a steady buildup, and engagement is fairly robust for a guy like me. Now, why am I bloviating about all this? What's the significance of this context? The video that I am using to illustrate this fascinating situation was one where I shared my lived experience in New York City, in Manhattan, where I've lived for 13 years. I recently moved to Orange County just last summer. And in this video, I'm sharing facts. These are facts about my experience in New York. I lived on the Upper West Side. Homelessness was an issue. There were many a day where I would open the front stoop, leave the little lobby of my walk-up, and be confronted by homeless people. There were many an instance where I felt physically threatened in my Upper West Side neighborhood. And by Upper West Side, I mean 100th Street and Broadway, more or less. And there was graffiti on the walls, and there were folks hanging out on street corners. And especially down Amsterdam, there were issues that made me feel that my personal security was threatened. I felt uncomfortable. And I cite an instance when I took the 2 train from 96th Street down to Times Square, and I was literally physically assaulted by a group of people on the train. They surrounded me, they wouldn't let me off the train, and I essentially had to linebacker my way through a group of young guys. These things happened to me, and I related these experiences within the context of the way Democrats now are talking about crime. Specifically, as we know, Trump has rolled in the National Guard into the District of Columbia, claiming that the city is lawless and out of control. The Democrats, in response to that, have argued that his claims are wrong, that crime is down 30% since only last year. Now, logically, this counterargument makes some sense. Why would you escalate law enforcement when ostensibly the local authorities have been doing a demonstrably better job of handling an acknowledged problem? Once again, logically, the counterargument makes sense. Donald Trump, you don't need to move the National Guard, deploy the National Guard into DC because crime has actually been going down, not up. And your allegations that the city is lawless are incorrect. And by extension, there's the implication that he is overextending his authority. I get it. Everyone gets it. But the emotional reaction on the part of many Americans is different. What many Americans hear when Democrats insist that crime is down 30% is analogous to what Americans have been hearing for years from the Democrats regarding inflation. Inflation isn't bad as you think. Inflation is going to come down. Stop worrying about inflation. The border. Don't worry about the border. The problems at the border have been over exaggerated. This to me sounds like a pattern. It's a pattern that denies the lived experience of millions of Americans. The border was a problem. It was a problem in the form of literally millions of undocumented people coming across it. It was a problem in terms of chaos at the border for those people who live there. Inflation. Inflation was at its highest level in decades during the Biden administration, largely as a result of overstimulating the economy during the COVID pandemic and even after the COVID pandemic. Now, once again, I reiterate, I am not being partisan. I'm not trying to point out strengths or weaknesses, respectively, on the part of Biden or Trump, the Democrats or the Republicans. I'm looking at this through the lens of marketing and messaging. And the marketing and messaging that the Democrats have been espousing is essentially one of don't believe your own senses. The border is not a problem. Inflation is not a problem. And to add to this approach, the age and apparent level of competence or capability of Biden himself is not a problem. Now, adding to this approach is the statement that crime is not a problem. Because when you say, but crime is down 30%, what Americans are hearing is crime is not a problem. It's down 30%. And this was proven to me vividly by comments that I received on this TikTok video. I had fellow TikTokers, one in particular, who pointed out that I am a liar. He said literally that I am a liar for stating that there were homeless people on my stoop, that I felt threatened walking in my own neighborhood, and that I was physically assaulted in Manhattan. And here's why. I must be a liar because crime is down in New York City. So, on the one hand, the messaging is working. It's being heard loud and clear by the Democrats' own constituents. Crime is down 30%, so there's no way that you experienced crime. Translation, there's no crime in New York City. What's the problem? Now, from a rational, reasonable cognitive perception, this makes no sense. But from an emotional perception, this doesn't just make sense. It's how this person reacted to my statement, my factual lived experience that I was assaulted physically in Manhattan. And I use this as an example to demonstrate how the messaging of the Democrats is again backfiring. Trump has made a brand identity, has created a brand identity consisting of these qualities. He is tough on the border and he's going to secure the border. That was in reaction to the perception of lawlessness and chaos at our border. Problem, solution. Trump promised better economy, inflation down. Now, the tariffs are a self-inflicted wound. And again, I'm not going into economic policy or, for that matter, partisan politics. But Trump's brand identity has the attributes of law and order, fiscal effectiveness, and those enabled him to take the office not just once, but twice. And my point here is the Democrats have still not learned the lesson. The lesson being that Trump, as paradoxical as it might seem, is a politician who is empathetic to his base. What Trump says is, I am a solution to problems that I am not only acknowledging, but will do my best to solve. And what the Democrats have been saying is, don't believe your own senses. The border is not a problem. Inflation and the economy are not a problem. And now they're reiterating that crime is not a problem. Now, once again, this is not to justify Trump rolling in the National Guard in D.C., but I'm using this as an example for Trump as a brand and his messaging being clear in opposition to the competing brand and messaging, which continues to fail. And in my estimation, it fails because the Democrats are unable or unwilling to understand the simple truth that the border was a problem. Inflation was a problem. The capabilities of the Democrat president was a problem, and crime continues to be a problem. So how should the Democrats, using this example, handle this kind of message? Well, here's an alternative. Here's an alternative to Don't send in the National Guard because crime is down 30%, which, as I'm saying, Americans here, the Democrats are insisting that crime is not a problem. Instead, Democrats we acknowledge that crime continues to be a problem, not only in DC, but throughout the country. We nonetheless believe that local law enforcement is the entity most capable of handling crime within their own jurisdictions. So don't send in the National Guard. There's no need to escalate federally when we all need to do a better job empowering local law enforcement to ensure the safety and well-being of our American citizens. That's a huge difference. Unfortunately, that's not being adopted. And because it's not being adopted, Trump continues to demonstrate that he's actually the empathetic, humanistic, kind, and concerned leader, whereas the Democrats are tone deaf, emotionally vacuous, and conscientiously lying about what most Americans know to be true. They've known the border's a problem. They knew inflation was a problem. They knew Biden was too old to be competent. And now they know that crime remains a problem. This to me is fascinating. And I've put a few counterpoints on TikTok. And the onslaught, the deluge of criticism and rebuke and ad hominem attacks, ostensibly from Democrats, has been stunning. Stunning. To me, it seems like a tribal, emotional whiplash reaction. Apparently, I'm coming across as a MAGA maniac complaining about the Democrat approach to branding and messaging. That much is apparent. But even those who seem to get through that often fail to understand that facts and figures mean nothing in comparison to vivid, real-life, lived experiences. And this is a classic case where a brand focuses on the features and maybe the advantages of their differentiation without paying any attention whatsoever to the emotional benefit, or in this case, detriment, of shifting the attention of the consumer onto information that they deem is either irrelevant or a smokescreen for conscientious deception. We see this over and over again with brands, consumer brands, where a technology product is all about feature sets, for example, that have nothing to do really with user experience. Here's where Steve Jobs really understood customers better than most of his competitors. He saw digital technology not as an appliance or a device, but as a transformative and flattering reflection on the consumer's sense of self and on their whole life and lifestyle. Politics is exactly like that. The unreasonableness, the aggression, borderline brutality that the two sides now feel toward each other has a lot to do with this same deeply rooted emotional foundation. And Trump has understood this from the beginning. And the Democrats, as evinced by my own little vignette on TikTok, still don't get it. The Democrats need to acknowledge the lived experiences of their own constituents. The Democrats cannot or should not allow ideology to interfere with the lived experience of their target audiences. And they need to be more malleable, far more flexible when it comes to appreciating what consumers ultimately need to hear, as opposed to ramming an agenda down the throats of their audiences that are felt to be morally superior or correct or beneficial to society. That kind of attitude, that kind of approach, fueled by statistics, by numbers, by air quote facts, always is doomed to fail, especially in a highly charged, deeply emotional environment like our current political landscape. So, in summary, brands are like politicians, and politicians are like brands. The messaging and campaign of products and services are analogous to the platform and messaging and overall approach of politicians out in the wild of our crazy, polarized, chaotic political landscape. Trump understands that attention is the commodity of our age, but also the need for a deep emotional connection with the American people. The Democrats continue to misunderstand what their own brand represents. The Democrats continue to misunderstand what kind of messages work well for the American people. Specifically, if the Democrat brand is one of humanism and, ironically enough, empathy, then listening to the implicit pain points of your customers/voters is a great place to start. That's what we've been focusing on in this podcast series on consultative selling. Do your discovery. Ask questions. Find out what your own constituents want. But most significantly, they might not even know what they want, but they know what hurts. Help them identify what hurts. Don't obfuscate what hurts. The border hurt. Inflation hurt. A debilitated president hurt. Crime hurts. By burying these or obfuscating them or flat out lying about them, you do the opposite of build an experience with your customer, with your voter, that can convert into a sale or a vote. A better strategy is to ask questions, to listen, and then craft an engagement which addresses those concerns and does it through the lens of the differentiation of your brand, of your product, of your service. By acknowledging crime in this instance rather than denying it, Democrats can then effectively differentiate themselves from Trump. We don't need escalation. We just need more local attention. And in and of itself, that statement not only doesn't raise objections or communicate a callous disregard for the voting base, but it begins to highlight Trump's excesses or perceived excesses in terms of overstepping executive authority. By focusing on crime being lower, you do the opposite of that. Acknowledge the crime, say it's better handled locally. And Trump is overextending himself. He's making a complicated situation more complicated. And there's endless variations of that approach. So I find this fascinating. And I think that brands similarly make this kind of mistake. And the two are interwoven. Politics, the marketplace, marketing, PR, campaign strategy. People are people. And when you're a politician, you're seeking behavioral modification. Love me, vote for me, support me. And if you're the steward of a brand, a product, a service, a technology, then it's your job to do exactly the same thing. So ask yourself, are you listening to your constituents? Are you listening to your customers? Are you focusing on their needs rather than your own features and advantages? Are you focused on their pain and acknowledging it and crafting customized solutions to meet their needs? Or are you spending most of your time bloviating about facts, figures, statistics that your customers otherwise couldn't care less about because they feel you're not paying attention to them? Food for thought, more later. And let me know what you think. Thank you for listening to Bald Ambition. Like, comment, share. To be continued.